But I want to start with this extraordinary email that I got today from one of the ABC's global warming preachers. From Paul Barry, host of the Media Watch and a man of the left, like every single one of the presenters of the national broadcaster's main current affairs shows. And this extraordinary email, I should say deceptive, I should say ignorant, malicious. This email tells us so much about the ABC today and its bias. It shows us presenters are just so full of this global warming madness that they will say any rubbish in the cause. Now, Paul Barry is upset by my column today in News Corporation papers around the country, the Herald Sun, Daily Telegraph, Advertiser and so on, in which I expose Barry's poor journalism. Now, I've covered the same topic on this show on Tuesday, so apologies if some of this is familiar. But I really do want to nail this deception. Barry, in his Media Watch show on Monday, was angry with me and fellow Sky News hosts for quoting Professor Andy Pitman, one of Australia's most, shall we say, committed global warming scientists, quoting an admission that Pitman made to a meeting of fellow warmists in Sydney. That was, don't blame drought on global warming.
Yes, Sky has fallen head over heels for a climate scientist. And how could that be? Because Professor Pitman recently said something they loved.
This may not be what you expect to hear, but as far as the climate scientists know, there is no link between climate change and drought. Now, that may not be what you read in the newspapers and sometimes hear commented, but there is no reason a priori why climate change should make the landscape more arid.
But Paul Barry, ABC guy, says Pitman, who's a warmist, has since changed his tune. Well, very slightly. I think Pitman was embarrassed that I started to quote his comments. And Barry said, well, he actually left out more that Pitman actually quoted, he actually said, and which I quoted. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But here is Barry on Monday claiming Pitman didn't exactly mean what you actually precisely heard him say. You know, global warming does not cause a drought.
Because last month, before Sky really piled on, a clarification was issued to say the professor had left out a crucial word.
Andy fully admits he should have said there is no direct link between climate change and drought.
Yes, no direct link, but there's still a link, says Pitman, telling Media Watch.
Do hotter temperatures lead directly to higher evaporation and a higher risk of drought? No. But does global warming lead to changes in rainfall patterns that can lead to drought? Yes. This indirect link is clear.
And expanding on that link by telling us,
in some regions, this increases the risk of drought. In other regions, it decreases the risk.
As I said here on Tuesday and in my column today, I thought, well, I think Pitman's just really covering his backside. And with Paul Barry's unprofessional help, because here is the rest of that Pitman quote that I used on Tuesday on this show, but which Media Watch omitted.
If you look at the Bureau of Meteorology data over the whole of the last 100 years, there's no trend in data. There is no drying trend. There's been a drying trend in the last 20 years, but there's been no drying trend in the last 100 years, and that's an expression of how variable the Australian rainfall climate is. The fundamental problem we have is we don't understand what causes droughts.
Now, that part of the quote, the second part of the Pitman quote there, that obviously exposed Pitman and Barry when they now claim, well, no, there is some indirect link between global warming and drought. Because as you just heard, what Pitman had in fact said privately to fellow warmists, when I don't think he imagined that I'd be listening and quoting, was actually, oh, well, let's admit it, there is no drying trend in Australia, and to be honest, we don't even understand what causes drought in the first place. No link. Now, I'm not surprised that Paul Barry left out that last bit. Destroys his argument. And so, to this email from Paul Barry today, which he posted on Twitter, what a shoddy piece of work. And as I said at the start, deceptive, ignorant. It's so bad that I've posted it on my blog so that you can read it and judge for yourself. You will find that in this letter to me, Barry nowhere explains why he left out that critical second half of what Pittman said. No justification for leaving out something that destroyed his argument. Instead, he uses that pathetic excuse that you hear from kids, and you don't accept it from them either. But he did it too. Barry says to me, but you have done exactly what you accuse us of doing by omitting two of Pittman's key points. Oh, really? I left out, says Barry, this bit of what Pittman said, and which I just played earlier. There's been a trend in the last 20 years, but there's been no trend in the last 100 years. They're in some regions, but not in other regions. Now, as you've probably just worked out, because you've got ears, wait a minute, didn't you just hear a minute ago those exact words that Barry says I left out in that grab from my show on Tuesday? Not left out at all. Now, it is true, and this is what Barry has jumped on. I didn't use those allegedly missing words in my column today, but that's because of the tight word limit there, 390 words. That's it. I had to cut. But I also didn't use them. I cut them because they are obviously irrelevant to my argument, Barry. Because we've all heard Pittman say there is no overall long-term trend. Droughts, natural variability. And what happens over 20 years is nothing compared to a trend over 100 years. And that's even more obvious if Barry had cared to look at Australia's rainfall over the century, as measured by the Bureau of Meteorology. Yes, there's been less rainfall in the past 20 years, a little, compared to that wet spell around the 1970s. But look, we're still getting more rain than in the first half of last century. Look at it. There is no global warming signal in this data. And it's exactly the same thing when you look at rainfall in eastern Australia, where there's now a drought that's causing people like Barry to say, oh, global warming, global warming. Again, no global warming signal in this data. But we're dealing with the ABC. Data means nothing. Bias and malice, that means everything. The ABC, totally out of control.